O Lord, hear me as I pray. Pay attention to my groaning. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God. For I pray to no one but you. Listen to my voice in the morning, Lord. Each morning I bring my request to you and wait expectantly. Last week I asked some questions, and I'm going to ask some more this morning. And here's the first one. What was the most searched question on Google in February of 2025? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. What was the most searched question on Google in February of 2025? So just a month ago, this was the most searched question. What to watch? 6,200,000 people went to Google asking it what to watch. That's a lot of people. And there's a long list of the top 100, but I went to number 10. So number one is what's the most thing to watch. Number 10 is where am I? 949,600 people are asking Google, where am I? So just out of curiosity, if you have ever searched Google on what to watch, raise your hand. Got a few people here, okay. Have you ever messaged Google, where am I? Got a person back in the back. Yeah, all right. Those are some questions, right? Have you ever asked yourself, how'd I get here? It's one thing to ask, where am I? It's another to ask, how did I get here? Why did this happen? How did this happen? And why do I keep doing it? You ever asked yourself those questions? My guess is you have. Maybe not in that exact phrase, but I'm guessing many, if not all of us, have asked these questions. And I imagine that you, like me, can relate to David when he says, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge." My guess is at some point in your life, as children of God, like me and like David, you have sat there going over and over and over in your mind about what you did wrong, the areas that you failed, the areas where you struggled. And when you did some things, no matter what you do, you can't seem to undo it. It's right there as a constant reminder, day in and day out. And you know, like David, that the sin was ultimately against God. And you know he saw it in his sight. And you know by faith and believe by faith that the verdict is right. I think of Paul when he was Saul on the road to Damascus. And the bright light comes upon him and God says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He knew at that moment what was going on. I think about all the different men in the Bible and all the different women in the Bible when they got to a point where they failed and a holy God was there. David, a man after God's own heart, penned these words. But have you ever hidden your pain? Because I am convinced that David, when he wrote this, it wasn't just his sin that we know about from 1 Samuel chapter 11, the sin with Bathsheba, although that is where it comes from. Did you know that in Matthew chapter 1, in the genealogy of Jesus, and it talks about David being the son of Jesse? And then from there it goes to Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba. David's failure is in front of him all the time. And so I think sometimes we hide our pain like David did all those months leading up from the sin with Bathsheba and plotting against Uriah and hiding it up until Nathan comes and confronts him. There's a song we're going to listen to. I want you to think hard about the words. I smile in the mirror, but it's all just a lie. I laugh at the crowd, but inside I want to cry. They don't see the storm that's brewing in my chest. They can't hear the pain, can feel the stress. I walk through the day with a mask on my face, but the weight on my shoulders is hard to erase. Every night I lie awake with thoughts in my head, and tears on my pillow, the words left unsaid. The pain I hide is deep inside. I'm keeping on, don't let it show inside. They see the smile, but not the scars. I'm breaking down my heart in these bars. The pain I hide, it cuts so deep. I cry alone when the walls asleep. I hold it in, but it's feeling slow. Nobody knows, nobody knows. I tell myself. Nobody knows. And when the lights go out and the world fades away, I sit with my tears, let them have their say. The weight of my heart is crushing my soul, but I can't let them see that I'm losing control. Behind the smile, there's a boy who cries, but I'll keep pretending till the day I die. The pain I hide is deep inside. I keep it locked, don't let it show inside. They see the smile, but not the scars. I'm breaking down behind these bars. The pain I hide, it got so deep. I cry alone when the world's asleep. I hold it in, but it's killing me slow. Nobody knows, nobody knows. Nobody knows the pain I hide. I keep it buried deep inside. Behind the laughter, behind the lie, I carry a heart and nobody tries. The pain I hide, it's mine to keep, and I hold it in till I'm buried deep. Can you feel David's racing heart as he hid his pain? Can you feel your own racing heart when you keep things to yourself? Can you feel David's lungs gasping for air because he's so overcome with the mistakes of his life and the things that he's done, the confrontation with God, the fact that Joab knows and other people know? Can you feel David's anxiety? Can you feel David's fear as it begins to kill him from the inside out? David is a man after God's own heart. But don't miss the fact that he's a man, flesh and blood. A man who struggles with emotion and being honest and true to who God's called him to be. And then giving in to areas of his life that are contrary to God. And then wrestling with all of that. I'd imagine David asked something like this: how did I get here? How did this happen? How did this happen? How did I go from being the shepherd boy who trusted God to deliver the giant to the man who plotted adultery, the man who plotted murder, the man who covered it up and involved other people in my treachery? How did I come to this for over 9 months, keeping it to myself? How did I come to the point to where God sends a prophet to me, and then I pronounce that man deserves to die because he comes into town and he takes a little lamb that belonged to this family, the one little lamb that they have. And in the story in 2 Samuel chapter 12, that little lamb is Bathsheba. How did I get to the point where I took another man's wife and murdered him to hide it? So maybe you've asked, how did I get here? Why did this happen? Why does it keep happening? Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. In the spring, at the time when the kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. This is one reason it happened. David was not where he was supposed to be. David, the king, the leader of God's people, the general of his army, should have been out in the field, should have been out with Uriah, should have been out with Joab, should have been fighting them, but instead he is back home where he's not supposed to be. And far too often we find ourselves getting into situations because our eyes, our fingers, our hands, our thoughts are somewhere they're not supposed to be. Which means we're not where we are supposed to be. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David said to someone, "Find out about her." The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent his messengers to get her. She came to him and slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. They need to understand that means she's fertile. That's why they included this. Then she went back home. Talked about this last week. Eliam was one of the trusted men in David's council. He took one of his closest friends' daughters. Uriah was one of the 30, one of his mighty men. He took his wife. And then he killed his friend. You can only imagine what he's thinking now. What does Joab think of me? Because I involved him in this. David was not where he was supposed to be. For him, it was lustful thoughts. Checking out this lady. Yeah, it's Bathsheba. Get her up here. He didn't ask her to come upstairs to have a conversation. It's a self-inflicted wound. And how often is our sin a result of our own folly? We do it to ourselves. The way we treat people, the things we say, the things we do. Is it not self-inflicted more often than not? We try to cast blame on other people, but no one's twisting our arm. No one's making us do what we do. David self-inflicted his wound. It was a foolish decision. He should have been with his people, but he wasn't. He wakes up, he goes up on the roof, he sees the woman. He should have kept going, but he stopped. And then he plotted. And then he acted. And that action led to adultery. And Jesus tells us to even look at a woman lustfully is to commit adultery. And that would go for women looking at men. And then he committed murder. But he plotted it and he thought about it. Now he brought Uriah back. He had this plan. He brought Uriah back and said, go be with your wife, basically is what he's saying when he says, wash your feet. And Uriah says, I can't do that. My men and my generals are out in the field. I can't. So he is a man of honor and a man of integrity, and he sleeps and he doesn't go. And David keeps trying and keeps trying. And to the point David even got him drunk. And even when he was drunk, he stayed right outside the king's palace and didn't go back home. Uriah is a man of integrity. Uriah is a man whose heart is honoring his God and his king. David is a manipulator, manipulating the situation to make things go the way he wants it to go, to cover up his sin, to get what he wants, to heck with everybody else around him as long as I get what I want. Isn't that what happens? We see it, we want it, we take it. There is a progression that David walked, and David stood, and David sat down. Psalm 1, and we're going to look at it in a minute, says, blessed is the man who does not walk, who does not stand in the seat of mockers. It says it does this. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked. In step with, keeping up, going out, doing things. It's saying fortunate, joyful are those who don't do this. David knows what he's talking about because he's messed up. He knows what it's like to feel the joy of the Lord and to feel the all-seeing eye of God's judgment upon him. He knows. So David writes this psalm. He says, don't walk in step with the wicked. Don't do what they do. Don't stand in the way of sinners take. Because if you're walking and you stand around them long enough, you begin to take on their culture, their actions. Maybe that's one reason why James tells us in James chapter 4, don't be friends with the world. Because the world is not in step with God. When we take on the identity of those around us, and I'm not talking about our choice in music or our choice in books or our choice in movies. I'm talking about the way we act, the way we think, the way we speak, the things that we value, the things that are foundational to us. The sand that the foolish man builds on. But David was walking, he was standing, he was sitting, and as a result, Bathsheba becomes pregnant and the baby dies. Uriah is murdered. And David ultimately is confronted by God through the prophet Nathan. And then he says this. The one who delights in the law of the Lord, who meditates on the law day and night, that person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. And this is what I'm getting at. What are you thinking about most of the time? What am I thinking about? Is it the things of God? Or the things of the world? Is it the things that God calls us to? Or is it the life that evil would cause us to? Do we even know what evil is anymore? Have we become like Isaiah, where we exchange bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter and call evil good and good evil? That's what happens when you walk in step with the wicked, stand in the seat of mockers. That's what happens, at least in my life. But David knows the difference, right? When he's no longer hiding his pain. God's confronted him with it. So David's really writing to you and me. God's talking to us through David. He doesn't want you to hurt. He doesn't want you to feel that loneliness, that pain, that separation. What parent would? He wants to be Abba. He wants to hold you close and hold you tight. He wants to walk with you and spend time with you. And when he says meditates on the law day and night, it means the instruction, what God's teaching us, what God's showing us. But it's thinking of it. That's the point. One person's thinking about wicked things. One person's thinking about godly things. One person's thinking about himself. The other one's thinking about his relationship with the Lord. And that relationship affects every other relationship around us. And that's either just a good Bible verse or it's true. So that person's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither, whatever it does prospers. James says the person who gives in to his evil desires, it becomes like death. And yet David says the person that leans into God finds life. And it's a choice. Why did I do it? How did I get here? Why do I keep doing it? Because we've all felt that feeling, right? When you feel close to God. Some of you can still remember what it was like when you came up out of the water and you knew your sins were washed away. And you knew that God had given his life for you. That everything was clean. And it didn't take long before you were hiding again. And Abba says, come on. But the wicked, they're like chaff. The wind blows away, and therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Can you see David? The prophet Nathan's come to him and says, that man is you. And Jesus says, you're right when you judge me. He knows. David's writing from a man who went from being king to being humbled. David's writing from a man who thought he had gotten away with something. But God always saw it. And God always wanted to take that pain away. But David was holding on to it. And because he held on to it, he eventually gets humbled. Romans 6, Paul says, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? Let that sink in. Nobody is twisting your arm to live contrary to God. No one's twisting my arm. Daniel lived at a time where it was against the law to pray. He prayed. Joseph, unlike David, when Potiphar's wife threw herself at him, because he was a slave, it says, come to bed with me, he ran. How can I dishonor my God? David's thoughts were on himself, and Joseph's thoughts were on the Lord. David, the king, was humble. Joseph, the slave, was exalted. You can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteousness. Now, we know that we die physically because of sin. We all understand that based on faith. Romans 6, right? We know that. Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3 kind of lay that out for us, right? But there's a different kind of death. We are separated from God, and we get that this morning because of sin. But God knows that you sometimes, like me sometimes, hide it away in our hearts, and we're dying on the inside. Because we're a slave to something that we just can't break free from. Sometimes it's because we don't want to. Sometimes it's because it's a hook that's got a hold of us and we don't know how to get free. And like Paul, we say, the things I want to do, I don't. And the things I shouldn't do, I do. It's a struggle. God gets it. David gets it. I get it, and I think you do. David says in Psalm 51, this is after the sin with Bathsheba, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, not mine, because my love got Uriah killed. My love rejected you, God. My love destroyed a marriage. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. David wasn't showing compassion when he killed Joab. And if you read through the rest of chapter 12, and Joab gives the report, one of the things you'll see in there is Joab knew from a previous battle when you attacked the front gate like he did, you were going to lose. And he used that tactic to carry out David's command. And not only was Uriah killed, but it says other men were killed with him. David basically murdered not just Uriah, but several men. Now, people die in battle. That happens. But he set them on a suicide mission with no intent to win so that David could be killed. I mean, so that Uriah could be killed. So that David's sin could be hidden. What lengths have we gone to hide our own sin? But David says, your love, your compassion, wash all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin, my rebellion. So how do things go from bad to worse? You ever done that? You know, it's like things just start falling apart, the wheels start coming off, you go from bad to worse. Well, I think it's sometimes we don't learn from our mistakes. David sure didn't. We don't acknowledge them. We hide them. We don't deal with them. And because we hide them and we don't deal with them, we don't learn from our past failures. And because we don't share with one another and confess our sins to God, we have no help from people who've been there, done that, and overcome that with God's help. And so we go on repeating the same things over and over and over again. And things go from bad to worse. That's why they often say that people like Ted Bundy and others will look at a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. And then from that, maybe a Playboy. And then from that, maybe some internet porn. And then from that, it gets more and more devious. It's a progression. Because what happens is the same thing with other things in life. It becomes going from being a high, woo, to, this doesn't do it for me anymore. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And the evil one, who is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, knows that. He gives us just enough to get us on the hook. Some of you go fishing. Some of you have taken, I don't know if y'all have done it, but I've seen it done. You'll take a can of dog food or something else or other bait, and you'll throw it out in the area to start bringing the fish in. They know they're eating on it. It's a good place. It's safe to do. Or maybe some of you are hunters, and you go out in the woods, and you put this big old thing up on the ground, this barrel full of corn, and for about a year, it throws corn out on the ground, and deer come up and eat it, and it's safe to do so. It's free. It's cheap. It's easy. I don't have to go pull it off a tree. It's right there. And then opening day of gun season comes. And things go from bad to worse. Sometimes we're just emotionally unstable. You ever make decisions based on how you feel? Not a good idea. Not a good idea. You ever texted somebody back because you read a text, you took it one way, and it's not the way they meant it? And then you created a whole more? Or James says, be careful with your tongue because a whole forest can be set on fire by little things that we say. But we have strong emotions of fear and anger, loneliness, lust. Most of the time when we act on those, we're making dumb choices. But nobody sees it. I live by myself. Or the husband's at work. But then what happens is, like a friend of mine in Alabama, she decided to take lunch off and go home. When she got home, she caught a good friend of hers in bed with her husband. That didn't happen overnight. But sooner or later, God sends the prophet Nathan to call you out because he loves you enough to bring you back in. Most affairs don't start off sexually. They start off emotionally through conversation. Because we long to be seen and to be heard and to be needed. We make things worse. And when we do, we get anxious and we get afraid and anger, can't breathe, and our heart's racing, like David. This is a big one. We're easily distracted from God. I can't tell you how many ministers I've talked to, including myself, where the Bible becomes a textbook instead of God's Word. I want to show you how much I know. I want to show you how much I've learned. I want to teach you some things like 4 plus 4 is 8, or A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the alphabet. And so sometimes in our personal studies, right, it becomes I just want to know the information. I want to know how to have a better life. I want to know how to be happy, how to get the things I've always wanted. But the Bible is about who God is. And so even that little subtle shift. But we're easily distracted from God and we don't concentrate so well. Squirrel. Our attention spans get shorter and shorter. Sometimes we're so focused on what's going on around us that we don't even have time to talk to God. I thought about this the other day. A lot of my prayers sometimes become, God, forgive me. God, I need. God, be with. Not bad things, right? But what does God want? How often do I say, God, what is it you want from me? God, what is it you want of your people today? God, our church family could use worship leaders and teachers and preachers and babysitters and all these other things. We could use these things in the kingdom, God. But if I'm not asking Him for them. But you know, when we're not distracted, we do things like this. About a month ago, my daughter was in the hospital having a baby. And my prayer was a lot more focused. Dear God, please be with McKenna. Please keep her safe. Be with the nurses. Be with the doctors. Be with the unborn baby, Rowan, God. Be with Connor. God, help her body to be strong. Help her body to be able to handle the stress of the pregnancy. Help things to go well. And I started naming all these different things because it was intent, it was passionate for it. I was thinking very critical that night, thinking in a good way. But sometimes we don't think critically because we're just too distracted. We don't reason sometimes. We just act. We don't think things through sometimes. We just act. But because we don't concentrate well, it ends up leading to bad decisions. Isn't that what David did? He wasn't concentrating on God. He says, blessed is the man who doesn't walk, stand, or sit, right? With the wicked. But blessed is the one who plants himself in God's word, with God. That person produces fruit in keeping with the Spirit, like a tree planted by water. He's comparing the two. One is focused on God, one is not. The one that's not dries up and blows away, like many of us do on the inside. Not that we're bad people, but our choices over time dry our hearts out. and dry our relationships out. We're often mentally and physically stressed out. Anybody ever been stressed out? Yeah. You have a hard time thinking when you're stressed, especially as the deadline's getting closer and closer? It's hard to think straight, hard to think clear. People start talking, all of a sudden, even the tick, tick, tick on the clock starts driving you crazy. When we're stressed out, we tend to not weigh the risk and rewards. David sure didn't. He just acted. And it leads to poor decisions. Hit pause on that for me. We're going to sing this song. Just click it. This is our closing song. Pull it back all the way if you don't mind. Slide it over, and I'll let you play it out from there. There you go. Today's sermon, I'm going to be honest with you, it's affected by some time I had with a good friend this weekend, who is every one of these things. Not the adultery, but stressed. His heart's pounding. He can't sleep. He's taking about 12 different kinds of medicines right now, prescribed by the doctor, trying to sleep, and none of it's working. He's on the go all the time. Doing well by the world's standards, loves the Lord. But he said something at the last minute as I was leaving the other night. He says, I don't worship with my family anymore. He says, I haven't been to church in about 10 weeks. I go to work, I get up, I'm there at 7, I work sometimes to 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. I come home, I go to my room, we have to unwind. Monday through Sunday sometimes with his job. And he feels like his whole world's falling apart. And that was David. Life comes at us hard. And we're just trying to survive, and so many of us are drying up on the inside. So many of us, like David, are hiding sin. We're hiding fear. And you can have an opportunity during this song, to, if you would like. We would love to pray with you and to sit with you and listen with you. Or to get with us afterwards, or call somebody this evening. Even our Sunday mornings sometimes become a rush to get through our songs and get home. And I get it. I totally get it. But all of that plays into how we got where we are individually. It doesn't mean we're awful people. We're created in the image of God. His image. The perfect and holy God created us in His image, and His Spirit lives within us. And He cries out on God's behalf to us every day. But sometimes we say no. And then we kind of feel bad about it, or we feel like, man, I should have. And so we come, and then He cries out again, and we say no, and it gets a little bit easier this time. And then we say no again, and it gets a little bit easier. And then we say no, and it gets a little bit easier, until before long, I love the idea of God. I like the idea of church, but my relationship with God is as hard as this concrete floor below us today. And we don't know how did I get here? It's a progression. It didn't happen overnight. But here's the cool thing about it. When God approached David about his sin with Bathsheba, God said, your sins are forgiven. They're forgiven. Not partially, completely. And I know you have friends who are struggling in your life. I know you do. I know sometimes it's you because sometimes it's me. This song we're going to sing, Oceans, really lean into what the words are. And I know we say that sometimes, but God has done so much by bringing His people to and through the water. And there is freedom to be found in Jesus. Where your feet may fail, God's don't. Where David failed, God didn't. And David still, in the book of Acts, is considered to be a man after God's own heart. Because he was created in the image of God. He failed, he learned, he acted. Will you do the same as we stand and sing?